What would you do if one night changed everything? A woman, 35, sits under the rain in Boston's Seaport District, counting the last few dollars in her wallet. Tomorrow, she must convince a judge that she can provide a stable home for the little girl she's raising as her own. But tonight, she meets a stranger, a man whose eyes carry the weight of the ocean, a man who will reappear in her life the next morning, sitting at the head of a boardroom table, not as a stranger, but as a billionaire CEO. From whispers in office hallways to storms on the Atlantic, from courtroom battles to choices between love and survival. This is not just a story about wealth or romance. It is about dignity, about what it means to fight for a child, to face rumors, and to choose what kind of home is worth building. Would you chase the sun on the West Coast, or stay in a small wooden house in New England where love and belonging wait on the porch? Stay with us to find out. And if you believe in stories that heal and inspire, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Evelyn Hart sat beneath the dripping awning of Beacon and Tide, a modest rooftop bar tucked into the edge of Boston's seaport. Rain slicked down the glass panels, streaking the view of the harbor into wavering shadows. Her wool coat was damp at the shoulders. Her shoes squelched whenever she shifted her feet. She opened her wallet for the fourth time that evening, counting bills she already knew by heart, 6 singles, a 10, and 3 coins, not even enough for the cab ride back to Dorchester. She closed the flap quickly, embarrassed by the sight of her own scarcity. What she feared wasn't the rain or the cold. It was the possibility of walking into court next week, standing before a judge, and hearing them say Nora would be placed elsewhere, that she, Evelyn, had no means to provide a stable environment. The phrase had haunted her since the lawyer for child services first spoke it. She needed this job interview tomorrow, needed it like oxygen. She ordered the cheapest wine on the menu, something pale and watery, and sipped it slowly to make it last. The glass trembled in her hand, more from exhaustion than from cold. She tried to picture the smile of her niece, the girl she'd raised for the last 3 years, and reminded herself why she could not, would not, fail. The bar was mostly empty. A storm kept tourists away, and locals stayed home. Only a handful of people dotted the room. That was when she noticed him. He stood at the far end, gazing out at the black sweep of the harbor, tall, broad-shouldered, with an ease that made him seem both out of place and entirely at home. When he finally turned, their eyes caught. His were dark, restless, like deep water before dawn. He walked toward her table, not with the swagger of someone looking for company, but with the hesitance of someone carrying loneliness. "Storms fierce tonight," he said quietly, setting his glass down near hers. His voice had a weight to it, as if used to commanding but tired of doing so. Evelyn gave a faint smile. Boston weather doesn't forgive much. They spoke about the rain first, then the sea. He told her how he had grown up on the coast, how his father never returned from a fishing trip when he was 16. He said he still woke sometimes to the sound of waves crashing, certain he'd hear his father's voice. She found herself telling him about Nora, about the girl who hummed while doing homework and collected seashells, even though she'd never seen the ocean. "I'm trying to keep her with me," Evelyn admitted, "but I need more than I have." She stopped herself, embarrassed at the raw truth spilling out to a stranger. He didn't flinch. His eyes softened. "Sometimes," he murmured, "all the money in the world doesn't buy what you want most. A warm kitchen, a voice waiting for you when you walk in." The simplicity of his words struck her. He looked like a man who could have anything, yet spoke like someone who had nothing. For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the storm rattle against the windows. One drink became 2. The distance between them shrank. She noticed the roughness of his hands, the faint scar along his jaw. He noticed the way she twisted the silver ring on her finger whenever she grew nervous. Their conversation slowed, but their eyes kept searching. When his fingers brushed hers, it felt less like seduction and more like recognition, 2 people stumbling into each other at the edge of their own private storms. Later, in the quiet of his hotel room, just a few blocks from the bar, the night unfolded with unexpected gentleness. No promises were spoken, no names exchanged, only the fragile honesty of two souls desperate to feel seen, if only for a few hours. When dawn crept pale across the horizon, Evelyn rose carefully from the bed. She dressed in silence, her interview clothes pressed and folded in her bag, her nerves already tugging her back to reality. She glanced once at the man still sleeping, his face unguarded, softened by rest. Something in her chest pulled, but she resisted. This wasn't her world. She had responsibilities, not luxuries. On the desk lay a hotel key card. She had set it aside the night before, but in her hurry she slipped it absent-mindedly into her blazer pocket. She didn't notice until later, but by then it was too late. She stepped into the chilly morning, the city washed clean by rain. The air smelled of salt and asphalt. Her hair still carried the faint trace of his cologne, warm and smoky, mixed with the sea air. She clutched her worn portfolio against her chest, as if it were armor. "Just get through today," she whispered to herself as she crossed toward the subway. One interview, one chance. Behind her, the storm clouds broke, scattering light across the harbor. She didn't look back. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and dish soap. The faucet dripped in uneven beats, a soft metallic tap against the sink that had been loose for months. Evelyn Hart leaned over the counter, slipping slices of bread into the toaster while scanning a stack of coupons spread like cards across the table. She wasn't just looking for bargains. She was measuring survival, one discount at a time. The clock on the wall ticked towards 7. Nora sat at the table in her plaid pajamas, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Her hair was wild from sleep, a halo of golden brown tangles. Evelyn slid a plate in front of her, a peanut butter sandwich cut down the middle. A red apple, polished against her sleeve, sat beside it. "Eat up," Evelyn said gently. "And don't forget your jacket today. It's colder than it looks." Nora grinned with the stubbornness of 12. "I'll wear it if you wear yours." Evelyn smiled, though her chest tightened. She would wear her old navy blazer today, the one she had ironed last night until the seams lay flat. It was 3 sizes too snug across the shoulders, but it still carried a certain dignity. She hoped it would be enough to hide how threadbare the lining had grown. As Nora chewed, Evelyn glanced at the bills pinned under a magnet on the fridge. Electric, heat, water. She had lined them up in order of urgency, each marked with the exact dollar amount she could spare from her next paycheck at the corner pharmacy. It was a delicate dance, always one step away from collapse. She thought back, briefly, to the years before. College had once been her dream English literature, a classroom full of books she wanted to teach, but her mother's sudden illness had changed everything. Hospital bills piled high. She left school, took a job waiting tables, then another cleaning houses. Dreams could wait. Survival couldn't. Now, raising Nora, she saw those sacrifices in sharper relief. She couldn't give the girl ballet lessons or brand-name clothes, but she could give her safety, a roof, someone who showed up every single day. That had to count for something. She pulled her planner from the counter, the cover worn at the edges. Every square was filled pharmacy shifts, tutoring gigs, babysitting for a neighbor. And now, tomorrow's interview circled in red. Whitaker Atlantic. She'd studied the company for weeks, steady salary, health insurance, a retirement plan. More than that, it was her chance to prove she could give Nora a future. The phone rang, its sharp sound cutting through the kitchen. Evelyn's stomach dropped before she even answered. "This is the Suffolk County Family Court," a voice said. "We're calling to confirm your guardianship review hearing for next Thursday at 10 a." Her grip on the receiver tightened. "Yes, I'll be there." When she hung up, the kitchen seemed smaller, the walls pressing closer. She rested her hand on the back of Nora's chair, drawing strength from the steady rhythm of the girl chewing her sandwich. She could not let anyone take her away, not after everything they had been through. Nora looked up with peanut butter on her chin. "Aunt Evie, are you okay?" Evelyn bent down, kissed her temple. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a busy day." The girl returned to her apple, trusting, unaware of the storm looming. Evelyn envied that innocence, but it also steeled her resolve. She had 1 week to secure her place in Nora's life. 1 week to prove she was more than bills and broken faucets. She packed Nora's lunch into a brown paper bag, folding the top with careful precision. She slipped a note inside, a small heart drawn with the stub of a pencil. Then she helped Nora into her jacket, tugging the zipper up against the chill. At the door, Evelyn checked her reflection in the narrow hallway mirror. Her blazer was pressed, her hair pinned neatly, though strands kept falling across her face. She smoothed them back, inhaled deeply, and forced a smile. Outside, the morning air carried the bite of early autumn, crisp and sharp. Leaves swirled along the cracked sidewalk, their edges already tinged with brown. Evelyn locked the door behind her and tightened her grip on the leather portfolio tucked beneath her arm. She whispered into the cool air, a vow meant for herself alone. They will not take her, not while I still have fight left. She squared her shoulders and stepped into the day, each breath a promise to hold on. The revolving glass doors at Whitaker Atlantic whispered shut behind Evelyn, sealing her into a world that gleamed with money. The lobby stretched high above her, its ceiling a canopy of polished steel and glass that reflected the pale October light. A massive map of transatlantic shipping routes dominated one wall, red lines crisscrossing oceans she had only ever read about. Beneath it, a row of clocks displayed times in London, Singapore, São Paulo. Her shoes clicked against marble as she walked toward the reception desk, trying not to stare. The place smelled faintly of lemon polish and something expensive she could not name. She tightened her grip on the leather portfolio until her knuckles whitened. "Good morning," the receptionist greeted, smiling with professional brightness. "You must be Ms. Hart." "Yes." Evelyn's voice sounded thin in her own ears. "You're expected. Please take a seat. They'll call you shortly." Evelyn chose a chair by the window. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, blazer neat, hair smoothed, but she still felt like a child wearing borrowed clothes. She pressed her knees together, steadying her breath. Then the elevator doors opened. He stepped out. For one heartbeat, her mind refused to accept it. The man from last night. The quiet stranger who had listened as if her words mattered. The man who had kissed her gently in the dark. Now, he walked across the lobby in a charcoal suit, his stride purposeful, his expression unreadable. And when the receptionist said, "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker," the truth struck her like cold water. CEO? She almost looked away, but their eyes met across the polished floor. Recognition flickered, sharp and undeniable, then vanished beneath a mask of formality. He nodded once, not as the man who had touched her cheek hours ago, but as an executive acknowledging a stranger. Her chest tightened. She lowered her gaze to her portfolio, as though it could shield her from the sudden flood of memory. Minutes later, she was ushered upstairs into a conference room. Sunlight spilled across a mahogany table that looked large enough to anchor a ship. 3 people waited: Ruth Collins from HR, her dark suit precise and sharp, Martin Keene, the COO, with silver hair and the air of a man accustomed to command, and Graham Whitaker himself at the head of the table. "Ms. Hart, thank you for coming," Ruth began. Her voice carried authority, but not unkindness. "Thank you for having me," Evelyn managed, forcing herself to meet their eyes. Ruth steady, Martin skeptical. Graham's a blank slate. The questions came quickly. "Describe your experience managing schedules. How would you prioritize conflicting demands? What would you do if an urgent client call interrupted a board meeting?" Evelyn drew on every year she had balanced multiple jobs. Every night she had managed Nora's needs while paying bills and tutoring for extra income. She spoke of color-coded spreadsheets, of setting priorities when everything felt urgent, of keeping calm when chaos pressed close. Ruth nodded at her answers. Martin leaned back, studying her with cool detachment. And Graham, he sat with his hands folded, expression perfectly neutral, as though last night had never happened. Yet once, when she faltered searching for the right phrase, She caught the briefest flicker in his eyes, something like encouragement. Then came the practical test. Ruth handed her a mock schedule, filled with overlapping meetings and urgent tasks. Please show us how you'd reorganize this. Evelyn spread the papers before her. She inhaled slowly. Imagine the cluttered kitchen table back home, where she had mapped out bills and shifts, groceries and court dates. She began moving tasks around, grouping related items, pushing lower priority meetings aside. If this call from Singapore comes in, she explained, I'd delay the board prep by 20 minutes, brief Mr. Keene separately, and keep minutes updated in real time. Martin raised a brow. And if the investor from London objects, then I'd reschedule with transparency, she said firmly. I'd offer a written summary and a follow-up slot. People respond better when they feel respected, even if inconvenienced. Silence stretched. Then Ruth gave a small smile. Impressive. Martin scribbled something in his notes. Graham leaned back, gaze steady on her. She felt heat rise to her cheeks but forced herself not to look away. The interview wound down. Ruth thanked her. Martin offered a curt nod. Graham said nothing until the very end, when he slid a folder across the table. 60-day trial, he said, his voice even. If approved, you'll begin Monday. Her fingers shook slightly as she took it. Tucked inside was a single sheet with his signature, and beneath it, in small handwriting, she almost missed. 2 words, thank you. Evelyn folded the paper back quickly, heart racing. She walked down the glass corridor afterward, her reflection stretching long and thin beside her. The city lay beyond the windows, busy and indifferent. She touched the folder to her chest, knowing she had stepped into something larger than a job. This was the start of a new chapter, and a test of how much truth she could bear to carry in silence. The phone on Evelyn's desk rang again, its sharp buzz cutting through the hum of the office. She picked it up, pressed the button, and listened. Another call from New Bedford, another shift in the tide of information. Outside the tall windows, the October sky had turned gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Somewhere far out in the Atlantic, a storm was building, and every ship on Whitaker's chart felt its shadow. Her desk was small, tucked just outside Graham Whitaker's office, but it was already covered with color-coded notes. Yellow for clients, blue for ports, pink for internal teams. She had inherited a calendar so crowded it looked like a storm map itself. She rolled up her sleeves, pulled the latest message toward her, and began sorting. The first task of the day was reworking the New Bedford negotiations. A shipment was due, but with the storm pushing north, docking schedules had to be changed. Evelyn shifted appointments, drafted confirmations, and made sure operations had backup plans. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, but her mind stayed steady. She had spent years managing chaos on a smaller scale: Nora's school conferences, double work shifts, rent deadlines. This was the same discipline, just with larger numbers and heavier consequences. When Graham stepped out of his office, he paused to watch her. His tie was loosened slightly, his face lined with focus. Status on New Bedford, he asked. Call rescheduled to 2. Evelyn replied, glancing at her notes. I've also rerouted the follow-up so the port team can brief you directly. If the storm shifts west, we'll still have a 2-hour buffer. He nodded once. Good. His tone was clipped, professional. There was no trace of the man from that rainy night, only the CEO, and she mirrored it. I'll keep you updated. For the rest of the morning, they worked in tandem. He issued decisions, she adjusted schedules, confirmed with ports, and filtered incoming requests. Their exchanges were efficient, respectful, and wrapped in a careful boundary neither dared cross. It might have stayed that way if not for the presence of Victoria Hale. Victoria arrived in the late afternoon, perfume trailing like smoke, her heels clicking against the tile. She was head of corporate strategy, known for her sharp wit and sharper ambition. She leaned casually on Evelyn's desk, eyes bright with false warmth. So, she drawled, the new secretary seems to know exactly which doors to walk through. Evelyn looked up from her calendar. I just follow the schedule. Of course you do. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. It's just, some people spend years learning how this company works. And some, she let the pause linger, seemed to skip the line. Before Evelyn could reply, Graham's door opened. Victoria. Inside, Victoria straightened, still smirking, and disappeared into the office. Evelyn exhaled slowly, returning to her notes, but the sting of the words clung like salt on skin. Later that evening, as the storm battered the coast, Evelyn checked her inbox. Among the confirmations and reschedules lay a single email. No subject line, no sender she recognized. People are talking. It read, CEO and his secretary. Not very professional. Is it? Her stomach dropped. She stared at the screen, the words burning. It was only a sentence, but it carried weight. A whisper that could spread, twist, destroy. She thought of Nora, of the court hearing only days away, of how fragile her chance already was. Her first impulse was to march into Graham's office, to demand he put an end to it, but she stopped herself. What would that look like? A secretary confronting the CEO. It would only fan the flames. Instead, she deleted the email, though its echo remained. She straightened her notes, refocused on the storm schedules, and reminded herself silence was safer. Work was safer. By nightfall, the rerouted plans held. The ships had avoided the worst of the storm. The negotiations remained on track, and her color-coded notes had become a map of survival. She should have felt proud, but as she walked into the pantry to refill her mug, she caught the shift of eyes. Two colleagues fell quiet mid-sentence. Their smiles turned tight, polite. She felt the weight of it, the doubt, the suspicion already growing. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic mug and forced herself to stand tall. The schedules had survived the storm, but inside these glass walls, another storm was forming, one made of whispers. No one said anything out loud, but whispers slid through the halls the way cold air sneaks under a door. You couldn't see it. You only felt it, enough to make your hands stiff when you tried to hold on to something important. Evelyn noticed it first in the pantry. A pair of colleagues stopped talking as soon as she stepped in. One left a half-full coffee cup abandoned on the counter, still steaming. Another offered a quick nod before hurrying out. The silence was worse than words. It told her that something had already been decided, even if no one would say it to her face. She stirred sugar into her mug, her hands steady though her stomach churned. She carried it back to her desk and forced herself into the comfort of lists. The day's schedule was unraveling, calls delayed, a client double-booked, an urgent shipment without clearance. She dove in, piecing the fragments together, steadying chaos with the same precision she had once used to stretch $5 into a week of groceries. By mid-afternoon, she had rerouted the day, meetings realigned, clients appeased, operations given a path forward. Ruth Collins from HR passed by, paused at the neat calendar pinned to Evelyn's desk, and gave the briefest nod of approval. That should have been enough, but the unease followed her. It clung like static when she opened her email later that evening. A letter from the court, formal words printed in heavy black type. The court reminds the guardian of the necessity to demonstrate a stable and appropriate environment for the child in her care. She read the line 3 times. Stable. Appropriate. Did whispers in an office count? Did silence in a pantry mean instability? Her chest tightened. If the wrong story reached the wrong ear, could they use it against her? She folded the letter back into its envelope, slid it into her portfolio, and sat very still. For Nora's sake, she could not let shadows take shape as evidence. The next morning, she found Victoria Hale leaning against the wall outside HR, as if she had simply paused there by chance. Her smile was soft, almost sweet. "Busy day," Victoria asked. Evelyn managed a polite nod. "Always. I hear you've been handling the storm schedules well. Quite a talent for someone so new." Victoria tilted her head, almost as if you knew exactly how to get close enough to handle things. The words were light, but the edge was sharp. Evelyn swallowed the retort that rose in her throat. She stepped past without answering. Victoria's perfume lingered like smoke behind her. By late afternoon, Ruth stopped by her desk. "Evelyn, could you come by my office tomorrow morning? There's a matter we need to discuss." The tone was neutral, professional, but Evelyn heard what was not said. A complaint, a shadow turned into a file. When Ruth walked away, Evelyn sat frozen. Her colleagues glanced at her, then away again, eyes sliding past as if she had become invisible. She opened her planner, forcing herself to focus. She clipped receipts to her timesheets. She printed copies of her schedules, color-coded proof of her work. She gathered everything she could think of to demonstrate professionalism, to anchor herself against whispers. But when she laid her head on her pillow that night, the quiet of the house pressed heavy. Nora's soft breathing from the next room should have comforted her. Instead, it sharpened her fear. If the wrong words reached the court, if someone decided she was unsuitable, she could lose the girl she loved like her own. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, wide awake, as the clock ticked past midnight. Tomorrow, she would have to defend not just her job, but her place in Nora's life. Evelyn pressed both hands against her knees to keep them from trembling. The conference room was too bright, the long windows framing the Charles River outside. The water lay still, almost glassy, a cruel contrast to the storm unraveling inside her chest. Across the table, Ruth Collins folded her hands over a slim file. Her tone was calm, deliberate. "We've received an anonymous complaint. Evelyn, to protect the company, we had to investigate." The folder opened with a soft click. Inside were printouts, blurred photos taken from a distance, text messages cropped and rearranged until they told a story that wasn't true. Evelyn leaned forward, heart hammering. "Those aren't mine. Those messages, someone cut them apart." Ruth's eyes were sympathetic but firm. "I believe you, but perception matters. Right now, this perception puts the company at risk." She heard the word before Ruth even said it: reassignment, effective immediately. "You'll be moved to records management in the lower level. It's temporary, while we resolve this matter." The words landed like a blow. Records management, a basement filled with filing cabinets, far from the executives she had worked so hard to prove herself to. It wasn't just a demotion, it was erasure. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward Graham. He sat at the end of the table, posture rigid, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word. The man who had once spoken of loneliness by the sea now looked like a stranger bound by protocol. Her voice caught, "Mr. Whitaker." But Ruth cut in gently. "He cannot comment." "Evelyn." Conflict of interest. Silence swallowed the room. Evelyn forced herself to nod, even as her throat burned. "I understand." She gathered the folder, tucking it into her portfolio, with hands that refused to stay steady. When she stepped into the corridor, the river stretched wide beyond the glass. Students jogged along the path, their laughter faint through the glass. Life outside kept moving, indifferent to the collapse happening inside these walls. Her reflection stared back at her in the window, small, pale, blazer still neat but spirit cracked. She wanted to walk away, to let the whole building swallow its lies without her. But then she thought of Nora, of the court letter folded carefully at home, warning her that stability mattered most. She straightened her shoulders. She would not show the world her brokenness. All that day, she moved boxes into the basement office. Dust rose from the files, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The air smelled of paper and ink, far from the crisp lemon polish upstairs. Colleagues passed her with brief nods, eyes sliding away too quickly. She felt their judgment, their relief that it wasn't them. When the shift ended, she carried her empty lunch bag back to Dorchester. Nora was at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, bent over math homework. She looked up, smiling. "Aunt Evie, did you ace your big day?" Evelyn smoothed her niece's hair, forcing a smile. "I did my best." That night, when Nora was asleep, Evelyn sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and began typing a resignation letter. The words came easily. "I cannot continue under these circumstances." Her finger hovered over the print button. Then her eyes drifted to the envelope from the court. The date circled in red ink. The future of a 12-year-old girl balanced on that one interview, that one paycheck, that proof of stability. Evelyn closed the laptop. She tore the resignation draft in half. "One more day," she whispered. "I'll give it one more day." She turned off the light and lay awake in the dark. The stillness of the Charles River etched against her memory. Above her, the city carried on. Below her, in the basement of Whitaker Atlantic, her own life had been pressed into silence. The truth leaves footprints. No matter how carefully someone tries to wipe them away, a trace remains. Late one evening, when most of Whitaker Atlantic had gone home, Caleb Rowan sat alone in the IT control room. The hum of servers filled the air, steady and low, like a heartbeat in the dark. He sipped from a dented thermos and scrolled through the day's security logs. Most entries were routine employees logging in from laptops, remote connections from ports overseas. But one pattern snagged his attention. A login appeared from the Boston office at 2 a.m, then again at 3, and again at 5, all tied to the same account, routed through a VPN. The timestamps didn't match the employee's work hours, and the files accessed internal emails, board schedules, contract drafts were far outside the scope of that user's role. Caleb frowned. He tapped deeper, tracing the digital trail. Whoever had logged in had tried to cover their tracks, but hidden in the code, small as mud on a white carpet, was a leftover IP string. It pointed back to one machine, one desk, Victoria Hales. His first instinct was disbelief. She was head of strategy, polished and trusted, but the logs didn't lie. And when he followed further, he found something worse. Copies of sensitive bid documents had been moved through her account, shared to an outside address, confidential numbers that could compromise Whitaker's competitive edge. Caleb sat back, heart racing. This wasn't gossip, it was sabotage. He printed the logs, careful to mark the chain of custody, and walked them upstairs to HR. Ruth Collins answered her office door, her face weary but alert. "Ruth," Caleb said, laying the papers down, "you need to see this." She studied the lines of code, her expression tightening with each page. When she finished, she closed the folder and looked at him squarely. "Are you certain?" "Absolutely. The footprint is clear. No one else could have left it." Ruth leaned back, exhaling slowly. For weeks, whispers had poisoned the air. Evelyn Hart had been buried under suspicion, and here, in black and white, was the real hand pulling strings. "We can't move too quickly," Ruth said at last. "If we mishandle this, she'll claim retaliation. We need Graham looped in." That evening, Ruth walked into the CEO's office. Graham stood at the window, the lights of Boston glittering beyond. He looked up when she entered, his face still shadowed from the strain of the past month. "Victoria?" he asked after scanning the report. "Yes," Ruth confirmed. Anonymous complaints, cropped photos, doctored texts, they all lead back to her account. And now, evidence of leaked bids. Graham closed the folder, his jaw hardening. For the first time in days, Ruth saw anger in his eyes, not the cold anger of a businessman, but the sharper kind, personal and protective. "She went after Evelyn," he said quietly. "She tried to ruin her." Ruth nodded. "We'll need to follow process, collect every piece of evidence, document every step. If this goes legal, we must be airtight." For the next 2 days, they worked in secret. Caleb traced every login, every file moved. Ruth documented the chain. Graham reviewed the contracts that had nearly slipped away. Each discovery confirmed the same truth: Evelyn had been innocent all along. The storm she had endured was never hers. On Friday evening, Graham sat alone in his office with the final report spread before him. Outside, the Charles River shimmered under streetlights, calm but impenetrable. He thought of Evelyn, now buried in the basement archives, her dignity bruised but her resolve unbroken. She had borne silence because he had given her none of his voice. It would end now. He called Ruth back in. "Prepare an all-hands meeting," he said. "Monday morning, everyone. I'll present this myself." Ruth hesitated. "It will be messy. Better messy truth than polished lies," he replied. His eyes burned with a steadiness that surprised even him. "We owe her that much." Ruth nodded. "Then Monday it is." As she left, Graham stayed at the window, watching headlights drift across the Longfellow Bridge. For the first time in weeks, he felt clarity. The truth had been buried under whispers, but footprints had led them back, and now it was time to bring it into the light. On Monday morning, the office pulsed with the buzz of incoming messages. Every inbox lit up at once. Evelyn sat in the basement archives, the hum of fluorescent lights above her, when the first ping echoed across her screen, then another and another. She opened her email and froze. The subject line read, "To all employees statement from leadership." Her heart beat faster as she clicked. The letter was formal, yet startlingly direct. It acknowledged that a senior executive, Victoria Hale, had engaged in misconduct. It confirmed that she had been terminated. Her actions referred to legal authorities. The words were plain forged communications, deliberate sabotage, breach of trust. And then, in the middle of the page, Evelyn saw her own name. "We also acknowledge that Evelyn Hart was wrongfully impacted by these actions. She has been cleared of all suspicion. Effective immediately. She will be reinstated to her role. We extend our apology for the hardship caused, and we reaffirm our commitment to integrity and fairness." She read the paragraph twice, hardly able to breathe. For weeks, she had endured silence, the weight of stares, the coldness of whispers. Now the same building that had let her sink was speaking her name in apology. A second email arrived minutes later. This one came directly from Graham. "I take responsibility for the delay in addressing this. Processes take time, but time cost you more than it should have. I am sorry. I will ensure transparency moving forward." Evelyn set her hand against her mouth. The words weren't warm, not sentimental, but they were honest. And honesty, after so much silence, felt like light breaking through a storm. By mid-morning, colleagues began to appear at her desk. Some offered hesitant smiles, a few mumbled apologies, eyes downcast. One woman from accounting placed a muffin on Evelyn's table without a word, then slipped away. The small gestures didn't erase the hurt, but they stitched something back together. When Ruth appeared, she didn't linger on formalities. "Come upstairs," she said softly. "Your desk is waiting." Evelyn climbed the stairs with measured steps. Each floor felt like rising out of a tunnel. When she reached the executive wing, she paused. Her desk sat just outside Graham's office again, neat and waiting. On it rested her thermos, exactly where she had left it weeks ago. Someone had dusted it, polished the steel until it gleamed. Her fingers curled around it, the warmth of memory flooding back. She lowered herself into the chair, breathing in the lemon-scented air she had once dreaded leaving. For the first time in weeks, she felt visible again, not pitied, not doubted, simply seen. Around noon, Graham stepped out of his office. His gaze caught hers. For a moment, the formality wavered. His voice was low when he spoke. "There's a project I'd like you to take on. It's ambitious, optimizing East Coast shipping schedules. It will require coordination across departments, a lot of eyes on your work. If you're willing, it could be your opportunity to set the record straight, not just for us, but for yourself." Evelyn held his gaze. The task was enormous, almost daunting. But in his words she heard something else, a chance not only to recover, but to prove that storms had not broken her. "Yes," she said simply. That evening, when she returned to Dorchester, Nora met her at the door. Evelyn knelt, holding her tight, the girls' laughter filling the small house. The day's strain eased in that embrace. Later, when she laid her blazer across the chair and poured tea into her old mug, Evelyn let herself smile, not a triumphant smile, but a quiet one. She had been tested, bent under suspicion, and still, she had held on. The storm had passed, and though scars remained, she had been given a new beginning. There are choices that refuse to be made in boardrooms or kitchens. Some only become clear when you stand where the wind rushes against your skin and the horizon stretches without end. Evelyn drove with Nora to Cape Cod that Saturday, the small sedan humming along winding roads lined with dunes and salt-bleached fences. She needed the ocean, the sound of waves crashing against rock, to help her think. Nora pressed her nose to the glass as they neared the lighthouse. "It looks like a tower from a storybook," she whispered. Evelyn smiled, though her chest felt heavy. They climbed the worn stone steps, hand in hand, the autumn wind tugging at their jackets. At the top, the sea opened wide before them. The air smelled of salt and pine, sharp and cleansing. Evelyn wrapped her scarf tighter and let the rhythm of the waves echo in her chest. She had brought Nora here for a reason. "What does home mean to you?" "Sweet pea," she asked gently. Nora thought for a long moment, her dark hair blowing across her cheeks. "It's where you wake me up for school, where we eat peanut butter sandwiches, where Mrs. Callahan from next door brings us cookies when her arthritis isn't too bad." The answer was simple, clear. Evelyn's throat tightened. For Nora, home was here, not money, not sunny coasts far away, just the everyday moments that made her feel safe. Yet the letter in Evelyn's bag told a different story. Harbor and Pine Consulting, San Diego. The offer was generous, beyond anything she had imagined. High salary, flexible hours, benefits that could erase years of worry, the chance to start over in warmth and light. But San Diego was 3,000 miles from Dorchester, from Nora's school, from the old neighbor who often stepped in when Evelyn worked late, from the judge who would soon decide if Evelyn's guardianship was strong enough to last. She leaned against the railing, her hands cold. Whitaker Atlantic's board had also spoken. They were willing to restructure reporting lines if she stayed. She would not answer directly to Graham anymore, avoiding conflicts of interest. It was practical, tidy, a way of protecting them both. On paper, both paths gleamed, one with stability close to home, the other with promise far away. But choices were not made on paper. That night, they rented a small cottage near the beach. The heater rattled, and the sheets smelled faintly of salt, but Nora curled against her side as they listened to the wind outside. Evelyn stared at the ceiling, her mind tracing every possibility. If she left for San Diego, Nora would have new schools, new friends, but no familiar anchor. Mrs. Callahan would not be there to wave from her porch. The church down the street would not be there with its bake sales and quiet prayers. If she stayed, money would remain tight, but the ground beneath Nora's feet would remain steady. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A reminder lit up the screen court, hearing 2 weeks. The decision could not wait. Evelyn turned and watched Nora sleep, her chest rising and falling in peace. She brushed a hand across the girl's hair, whispering words no one else would hear. "I'll find the right answer. For you." Outside, the lighthouse beams swept across the water, steady and patient, guiding sailors through the dark. Evelyn closed her eyes and prayed she would find her own light, one that pointed toward the life Nora deserved. The courtroom smelled faintly of old varnish and paper. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted. A clock on the wall ticked, its hands a minute slow, as if time itself hesitated in this place. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table, her palms pressed together on her lap, steadying her breath. Across from her, the judge adjusted his glasses. His voice was calm, but his question pierced through the hush. "Tell me, Ms. Hart, what is the living environment for your niece?" The words hung in the room like a bell strike. Evelyn drew a breath. She spoke of the house in Dorchester, small but clean, of mornings that began with toast and Nora's laughter, of evenings when homework was spread across the kitchen table beside Evelyn's laptop. She mentioned Mrs. Callahan, the elderly neighbor who helped when work ran late. She painted not a grand picture, but a true one. Then she handed over the letters. The formal apology from Whitaker Atlantic. The new policy documents that outline transparency and accountability. The note confirming her reinstatement, signed by HR and the COO. Each page told a story of struggle, vindication, and a company's effort to right its wrongs. The judge skimmed the documents, lips pursed, eyes moving carefully. "And your position now? I report to the Chief Operating Officer." Evelyn answered softly. "The reporting lines have been restructured to ensure professionalism. My work is steady. My income is secure, from the gallery." She felt Graham's presence, though he sat apart, in silence, as rules required. He had chosen the far bench, not beside her, not in front, but close enough that she could feel his gaze. She did not look back, but the weight of his quiet support steadied her spine. Nora swung her legs on the bench, whispering to the social worker beside her. Evelyn's eyes softened. This was all for her, the child whose laughter kept the walls of their little home alive. When Evelyn finished, the room was still. The judge tapped his pen once, then set it aside. "Ms. Hart," he said slowly, "I see stability. I see perseverance. And I see a guardian who has fought to maintain both integrity and care. The court recognizes your guardianship as continuing and valid. You have provided a suitable and nurturing home for your niece." Evelyn's breath caught. Relief swept through her chest like fresh air after a storm. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering a silent, "Thank you." The gavel came down with a final thud. Decision granted. Guardianship affirmed. Outside, on the courthouse steps, the autumn sun glowed weak but steady. Evelyn held Nora's hand as reporters and lawyers filtered past. She could hear the faint toll of church bells from a block away, each note ringing like confirmation. Her phone buzzed, a reminder. The offer from San Diego still waited, deadline pressing. She looked down at Nora, who clutched her backpack straps with both hands. Boston was not perfect. The winters were harsh, the bills tight. But here was home, here were roots, here was family. "I'm staying," Evelyn murmured to herself. "San Diego will have to wait for someone else." She bent and kissed Nora's forehead, sealing the choice not with ink, but with love. Later, as the crowd thinned, Graham approached. His steps were measured, his expression composed. He waited until Nora skipped ahead toward the fountain before speaking. "You were extraordinary in there," he said quietly. His eyes searched hers, steady and unguarded. "You didn't need me. You stood on your own." "I had to," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm. "For her, for me." He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket. A small box rested in his palm. It was not flashy, not lined with velvet, just a plain wooden box, worn smooth at the edges. "I wanted to give you this," he said, "not as a promise of anything grand, just a reminder that even when I was silent, I was on your side." Evelyn's fingers hovered, then lifted the lid. Inside lay a simple silver locket, its surface engraved with the faint outline of a lighthouse. She traced the design with her thumb, her throat tightening. The lighthouse, a beam in the dark, a reminder that even in storms, light could guide the way. She closed the box gently. "Thank you," she whispered. The words carried more weight than any vow. Behind them, the courthouse doors swung shut, echoing. Before them stretched the city, alive with honking horns and rushing footsteps. But for a moment, everything stilled. Evelyn stood on the steps, Nora laughing near the fountain, Graham waiting quietly beside her. And she knew this was the beginning of something steadier, something she could build upon. Not a fairy tale, not perfection, but a life worth living, one day at a time. After storms, people in coastal towns once hung a lantern at the front porch to tell sailors hope is still here. Come home safe. Months later, Evelyn remembered that image when Graham suggested a name for their new foundation. They called it Harbor Light. 6 months had passed since the hearing. Life had settled into rhythms, not perfect but steady. At Whitaker Atlantic, The East Coast scheduling project Evelyn had led was complete. The results spoke louder than any rumor ever had. Delays down 30%, costs cut by millions. Trade magazines published articles praising the system. At a ceremony in New York, Graham accepted the award. But when the cameras flashed, he gestured for Evelyn to step forward too. She did, her blazer crisp, her voice steady, as she spoke of teamwork, discipline, and respect for the unseen people who kept ships moving. She knew it wasn't just numbers they were celebrating. It was her chance to stand in the light without apology. The Harbor Light Fund was born from that success. Officially, it provided assistance to families of seafarers lost at sea, and to single mothers struggling to keep homes steady in New England towns. Unofficially, it was a vow hers and Graham's to turn storms into shelter for others. At the ribbon cutting, Evelyn held the scissors beside him. Reporters asked about the partnership, and Graham said simply, "It's about giving people a steady harbor." Evelyn reminded us what that means. Away from headlines. Life softened. Nora begged for a dog, and one rainy afternoon, they adopted a scruffy rescue with floppy ears and endless energy. The dog tore through the small yard, knocking over flower pots, and Evelyn laughed until her sides ached. Together, they planted new flowers, hardy ones that could stand New England frost. Weekends sometimes meant ferries to Martha's Vineyard, where they walked the quiet beaches collecting shells. Nora's laughter carried across the sand, the dog chasing her footprints. Evelyn let the salt air fill her lungs. Each breath a reminder that healing was not loud. It was steady, like waves returning again and again. One evening, Graham joined them in the garden. He wore no tie, just a worn sweater, his hands in his pockets. He reached for her gently, pressing a small box into her palm. "Not a grand gesture," he said softly. "Just something I want you to carry, if you choose." Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a lighthouse. Simple, strong, its edges smooth from careful work. Evelyn turned it in her hand, the metal catching the last light of dusk. "It's not about binding you," he continued. "It's about walking beside you, leaving space for you to breathe. I want to be here, not to hold you back, but to stand with you." Evelyn's eyes stung. She thought of the storms, the silence, the whispers that once tried to crush her. She thought of the courtroom, where she had stood alone and been heard. And now, here was a promise not of possession, but of respect. She clasped the pendant around her neck. The metal rested warm against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered, voice unsteady. That night, the kitchen filled with warmth. Nora set the table, humming off-key. The dog settled at Evelyn's feet. Graham poured tea into 2 mugs, steam rising. The air carried the smell of roasted chicken, herbs, and butter. They ate slowly, laughter mixing with the clink of forks, the glow of lamplight turning the small dining room golden. Outside, winter crept toward Boston. But inside, hope felt anchored. The storm season was behind them, and harbor light shone for others now, for Evelyn, for Nora, for Graham. It was more than a fund or a name. It was the truth they had fought to reach that dignity. Respect and love could build a harbor strong enough to weather any sea. And as Nora's laughter rang through the house, Evelyn realized sometimes the greatest victories were not loud. They were found in a warm kitchen, a steady hand, and a light kept burning through the dark. If it were you, what would you choose? A warm coast on the west, where the sun never hides behind clouds, or a wooden porch in New England, weathered but steady, where someone waits and calls you home? Evelyn's story has carried us through storms, boardrooms, whispers, and the quiet strength of a kitchen table. In the end, her choice was not about giving up a career for love. It was about refusing to let either be stolen from her. She learned that when dignity and courage stand together, work can be honorable, and love can be respectful. This is the truth we sometimes forget. Stability does not come from money alone, nor from titles written on glass doors. It comes from people who see us as we are, who trust us enough to let us breathe. A home is not measured in square feet or polished floors. A home is measured in safety, in laughter, in the quiet assurance that we belong. For Evelyn, home meant the laughter of a 12-year-old girl at the end of the day. It meant the steady companionship of a man who chose honesty over silence. It meant a community that, after faltering, learned to apologize and stand together again. For you, it might mean something else. A kitchen light that stays on when the world grows dark. A friend who remembers your name even when time has passed. A grandchild's voice saying, "Stay a little longer." The storms of life are not always hurricanes at sea. Sometimes they are the whispers of doubt, the shadows of regret, the weight of choices we think came too late. But storms pass, and when they do, even if our houses lean, even if our hands shake, there can still be light waiting for us on the porch. Maybe you have carried burdens for decades. Maybe you wonder if the time for new beginnings is gone. I want to tell you, it has not. As long as breath remains, there are still harbors to reach, still doors to open, still mornings when laughter can return. Evelyn chose to stay, to root herself where her niece could thrive, to accept love that did not bind but respected. And in that choice, she showed us all something simple, that healing is possible, that storms do not have the last word. So, I leave you with this question. If it were you, would you chase the sun on the far coast, or stay beneath the old porch where home waits? There is no wrong answer, only the one that brings you peace. Take a moment, reflect, and if you wish, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words may be the lantern that guides someone else through their own storm. If you found a piece of your own story in Evelyn's journey, I invite you to stay with us at Shining Stories. Subscribe, and you will find more voices, more lives, more quiet truths that remind us we are never alone. Because another story is already waiting, it begins, as they all do, with a porch light glowing against the dark. And until then, may your harbor be steady, your hands find rest, and your heart remember there is always hope for the ones who stay. Life rarely offers us clear skies. More often, it gives us storms, whispers of doubt, financial strain, or choices that feel impossible. Evelyn's journey reminds us that true stability is not built from wealth or titles, but from the quiet strength of showing up, day after day, for the people we love. She teaches us that dignity is found in holding your head high, even when others misjudge you, and courage is choosing to stay rooted when running away might seem easier. For many of us, past years may feel heavy with regret or sacrifice. Yet Evelyn's story is a lantern in the dark. It shows that healing is possible at any age, and that love and integrity can still rebuild a home, even after storms have torn it apart. Perhaps the most powerful lesson is this home is not a place of perfection, but a place where we are seen, respected, and allowed to breathe. That is something we can all create for our children, our families, and ourselves, no matter where we stand today. So, let us hold our own harbor light, a reminder that even in the hardest seasons, hope and belonging can guide us safely home. Thank you for spending your time with Shining Stories. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to keep the light alive. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every gesture helps these stories reach others who may need a reminder of hope and belonging. We look forward to welcoming you back for the next story.